So I'm really delighted to be here. I spent a lot of time in Toronto, and it looks like in the last few weeks I've taken the weather everywhere I've gone, so I apologize for that. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit from a different perspective, from the Thomson Reuters perspective, how we think about data, this really cool word that we talk a lot about, especially in Toronto, AI, and some of the components that together give rise to new business models. So a little bit about Thomson Reuters Labs. So first, Thomson Reuters is a global information and data provider. We're headquartered here in Toronto, and we serve a lot of different industries, from financial services to the legal industry, tax and accounting, and really our clients are knowledge workers that are increasingly inundated with a lot of data, as well as looking at how to leverage the data to be competitively positioned in their markets. Thomson Reuters Labs is a combination now of our innovation labs. We work with startups. Actually, one of our partners is one of the in this group here in Mindbridge. Startups, universities, we talk about working with the unhirables, people that wouldn't work at Thomson Reuters, but through an ecosystem partnership, we can start creating value together. So we have a lab in Waterloo. Our cognitive center, AI center, is based in Toronto, right here on Bremner. And we have a lot of partnership, essentially where we have a lot of critical customers. So Singapore in financial services, London, and looking at emerging market where customers are going mobile first, like in Cape Town in South Africa. So, you know, it's obvious to the audience here that data is a strategic asset, and I think the pivotal time we're hitting now is that we have a combination of abundance of data, not only in scale and scope, as well as being able to now look at it from a historical perspective. The thing that's really changing the ability to take value, to gain value from the data, is the sort of combination of compute power and technologies built on that compute power and faster network. So new tools to ingest, store, process, enhance, and distribute the data are getting at a point, combined with algorithms and systems, where we can start doing really exciting things. So some of it are obvious to people in this room. You're in the business of doing that. It's obviously happening, as the previous speaker talked about, in being able to better understand the data in healthcare. As a consumer, I want to have access to that. Governments are optimizing transportation route. New business models are spinning up around that. And I think the sort of interesting comment here that hopefully I don't get misquoted on, but sometimes do, is you know, there's this idea that data information wants to be free. But actually, the full quote around that is information also wants to be expensive, and that tension will not go away. So that's a quote from 1984 from Stewart Brand. So this idea that information wants to be more accessible, more shareable, is really a concept I want to talk a little bit about. And I think it's underpinning this notion that wherever you are in whatever industry you are, you need to think about data not only as a strategic asset, but as core to your strategy. So I kind of put data, if you're thinking about data strategy, into sort of three buckets, of business model. The first one is selling the raw data. So you might have a source of data, and I'll give some examples in the next slides, that provide value to you, and you might be wanting to distribute that to others. It's an easy way, if you have the data, to make some money, and it might not be the business you're in, and we'll talk about why that model makes sense. The other one, which obviously is either something you use internally or you're in that business, is to build analytics. So gaining insights either from your internal data to make your business intelligence better, or building essentially better solutions for your customers. And it's either a combination of your own data, or your internal system, the data you're collecting through your operations, or combining that with other data sources. So this is sort of this topic of being increasingly more data-driven, and I think the key point here is that you need talent, data science talent. So I've been in the last 2 years building up that capability at Thomson Reuters, and I think this idea of what are the skill sets that you need to bring to be able to really deliver value around analytics, not only ranges from having the brightest data scientists, but actually having data science fluent executive leadership that's starting to think about value around data and data analytics across your organization, and then what are the consequences in your whole life cycle of your product, and the capability and skill sets you need to have there. And then the one that I'm the most excited about, the one I think is coming down to the future and maybe something that might be worth for this audience to talk a bit more about, is this notion that there are business models that are entirely enabled by data. So platform business models are inherently enabled through data, like if you think of an Uber, for instance. But I believe that there is a rise of new business models that are data business models. And so this is the notion that you might have essentially a marketplace for data where you basically create the two-sided demand, the supply and demand for the data. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the principles that would enable such data marketplaces to emerge. So let's talk about those three models I just described. The first one is selling the raw data. So an example might be Target provides its point of sale data to suppliers who monitor this information to better optimize their inventory. Nielsen sells customer shopper behavior to 250,000 households in 25 countries to consumer goods suppliers and retailers to better essentially do marketing and sales. And, or for instance, INRIX offers real-time traffic information to companies in like Ford Motor Company. So you might have a data set that is valuable to your clients, and that raw data is in itself the value proposition. So the uniqueness and the exclusivity of the data is obviously your value proposition, and it's something you have essentially a unique view on. Now, you can do more than that. And a view of that would be that not only you have the data, but you build analytics on top of it. So a couple of examples, and one that I really like, and I'll actually focus on that one, is there's a gentleman in Boston who had this really interesting domain expertise around maritime studies and happened to be a lawyer at the same time. So one of the things that happened is he stumbled onto an opportunity to acquire container-level shipping data and negotiated an exclusive right to that data. And that data seemed extremely valuable. So at first he looked at selling it, the first business model, selling it as raw data. Then combining it with some financial models, identified that, well, actually the inherent value in the data is so big that by doing the analytics, that essentially it could be a signal into predicting commodities movement. And so the company he started, Cargometrics, pivoted from being a raw data provider to actually becoming its own hedge fund. So building the platform. So one of the things that's common in every platform business model are some of the components that essentially are about creating two-sided business models. You need a really good understanding of your users. So there are algorithms needed to match the demand side and the supply side. It does take a significant investment. I think one of the challenges in thinking about platform business models is it's sometimes quite orthogonal to traditional product strategies. They don't fit the same sort of model simply because the idea of building the network effects, creating standards, ecosystems, as the previous speaker was talking about, tend to not look like a standard product strategy. And now if you start thinking about a data marketplace, then it becomes quite interesting, because not only the data is the underlying capability to build a platform, so understanding the users, the suppliers, the vendors, but data is the commodity that's traded on the marketplace. So I think what we're seeing is that with the rise of all these new data sets, all the way from the ones in payment, from IoT, from being able to more effectively mine massive amount of documents through AI techniques like NLP, we're starting to see a lot of data set with specific applications. The question here is whether there is an opportunity to bring various sets of data for the financial services to start making investment decisions, or for other purposes, and essentially seeing a rise of marketplaces for data. So I can't really give a talk without talking about AI these days, and I wanted to talk about AI because we just talked about how algorithms are essentially the technology that enables building a platform business model. And I think some of the thing we hear a lot talked about is that AI is the silver bullet. I'll add some data on top of that great data I have, and great things happen. We think about AI in a way at Thomson Reuters, which I think resonates in probably in anywhere else you might look at it, is that AI alone doesn't create value. It's really, there's no such thing as AI out of the box, and you really need to combine the data, the domain expertise, the understanding of the value proposition for the user and the application you're going after. And in our case, we really think about the domain expertise being embedded in the data model and the content itself. And you combine that with technical expertise, of course, and in our case, we believe in doing a lot of partnership in that space because there's a lot of innovation in the technology. But it's the combination of those three that really create value. And as you think about, what does AI mean for my business, this notion of thinking about what is the domain expertise, how do I embed that domain expertise in the data, and then how do I bring people that are familiar enough with the data and the domain expertise to start really identifying the right technical solutions to apply. I think that's how you create value with AI. And one of the things, as I talked about, is so how do you create that domain expertise? How do you think about your data strategy if you're really building up on top of your data and trying to apply AI structures with it? So we've been thinking about this for quite a while at Thomson Reuters, and one of the concepts we've developed with the Open Data Institute in the UK with Tim Berners-Lee's organization was to start thinking about a framework to make data valuable. And so I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes sharing that with you. We actually have a white paper available on our website around this concept of shareability. And I think that concept is useful as you're starting to think about different business models, as well as thinking about how do you benefit from applying artificial intelligence and new analytics to your data. So this concept is this concept of shareability. So the idea here is that the raw data or complicated data models, as you bring different data sets together, are making the value creation of data difficult. So this concept of shareability is really to think about how to address that. So really it's about a quality of the data that's independent whether you're planning to license the data, make the data open, use it internally. It's really about how do you make that data more valuable. It's about the degree and nature of advanced preparation to make the data more collectively useful. Again, as I talked about data strategy, the notion of thinking about shareability should be done up front. So this concept is about making data well described, well managed, easy to consume, to be shared effectively with an organization, as well as being able to make it open for external partnership to gain better insight, build new products and services. And the framework here is about the concepts of technical, organizational, cultural challenges that must be overcome to make the data more shareable. So these are sort of the three components we talk about. How do you describe the data, communicate and document the meaning of the data up front, describe the data provenance, describe the access and usage right, and then publish a description of the data in a useful data catalog. So that's the description of the data. Design and accessibility, this is ways to make the user access the data on demand, use more common standards strategically, thinking about the various standards out there and the standard strategy, and then design data for everyone. So an example here is internally we use a tool called Data Science Studio from a company called Data IQ. It's a French startup, and the reason we have this tool is that it really helps our data scientists explore multiple data sets, quickly get to resolving the different schemes, connecting them with the open standards we use, and make that experience of experimenting with data more useful. Which leads to the third point, which is you need a culture that embraces that open and collaborative culture, that understands by definition that value creation through data is done through an ecosystem. I think that's sort of the main point of this concept. It's interesting because whether you're planning to make that data open, licensed, or closed is is separate from the shareability. However, the planning upfront as you're acquiring the data, creating the data, or processing the data requires thinking about this framework at the onset. So really, in closing, we think that data is not just a strategic asset. I think data is strategy. It should be as part of your strategy for creating new business and new products. The monetization models, including using new technology, is only as good as the underlying data quality and the way you think about the components and quality of the data that you're producing or acquiring. And the concept of shareability, which we've developed and think about upfront, is a foundational value to creating these new business models. Thank you.